So we are now recording, and as I mentioned, please keep your audio turned off. If you would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand, and you do that by clicking on the reactions icon at the bottom, and there is a message where you can click to raise your hand. But as I said, we'll take the questions. We'll try to answer some of the questions in the chat box as we go along. I will be moderating that chat box. And then when Dr. Cho's presentation is over, then we'll have some opportunity to chat about those questions and ask her questions that you may have. And so with that, I would like to hand it over to Ms. Katrina Locke. She's the county's Sustainability and Resilience Manager, and we are here thanks to her good work. She planned this program, wrote a grant about, 4 or 5 years ago, and so that we're very fortunate to be able to be here. So Katrina, welcome.
Thank you, Kelly. So welcome to the Save Our Springs and Rivers education series, and thank you for joining local experts as they discuss the challenges and benefits of instituting low impact development strategies into our structures and community design. So I want to thank any elected officials who are on the meeting and thank them for their service to our community. And then just to kind of give you some background, the Save Our Springs and Rivers series is a cooperative project that's been funded in part by the United States Environmental Protection Agency through a Florida Department of Environmental Protection non-point source pollution grant. And the focus of the grant initiatives is to provide residents with information about the sources of non-point source pollution, those sources that are negatively impacting Blue Spring, and actions we can all take to contribute towards the solutions. And those actions are actions that can be replicated throughout the county to make positive impacts on our water quality. So think about those as we start going through this series. You may have seen some of these initiatives that we've been doing throughout the county. We have the Save Time to Change the Way We Go education campaign, and that was a marketing campaign that was designed to provide facts about the impacts of septic systems and the nutrient pollution from those septic systems. Or you might have attended one of our Save Our Springs and Rivers water academies. And tonight and over the next week or so, we're going to talk about low impact development, an approach to land development or redevelopment that works with nature to manage stormwater as close to its source as possible. Through the workshops, we hope to enhance an understanding of the value of low impact development and green infrastructure as a way to prevent pollution from entering our surface and groundwater bodies, and as a way to provide us with a buffer for storm and flooding conditions. Low impact development isn't a new concept, but we've started talking about it more because of nutrient pollution and because of how it can be incorporated into development to reduce the impacts of flooding from storm surge and sea level rise. Reducing non-point source pollution and being more resilient is about us all working together as a community across jurisdictional boundaries towards solutions to reduce our impacts on our environment. So as we participate in tonight's forum and any other forums that you might join us for, please think about practical applications of low impact development and green infrastructure and how these techniques can promote healthy communities. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly.
Great. Thank you so much, Katrina. Yeah, so this storm that we're having is knocking out internet one city at a time. I'm getting messages from folks who just lost internet, so they'll be joining us in a bit. But I wanted to take a moment to thank Dr. Cho, who is joining us this evening. Dr. Cho is a professor of integrated and environmental science at Bethune-Cookman University, and we're really fortunate to have Dr. Cho not only with us tonight, but she's been a leading researcher in our area for quite a long time. From her days when she was the premier seagrass researcher in our area, she has been doing research throughout the whole, downturn in the water quality with the algal blooms. She has done research all over Volusia County, and she has a lot to share with us. And so with that, Dr. Cho, welcome.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I hope the internet stays because I've heard some, thunder. But the worst part, I think, is just past. So I'm gonna share my screen and I'll go from there. Let's see. Okay. I'm not sure if you see my slide or my
We can see your slide.
Okay. Okay. So, well, yes, thank you. And again, I go by Jay. So my name is Jay Cho at Bethune-Cookman University. So I was asked to give a talk on low impact development, and particular about the stormwater runoff in coastal urban area. So, like I know a lot of you, and you all know what stormwater and the surface runoff is, but rainwater generates stormwater, and the excess stormwater that is not infiltrated into subsurface becomes surface runoff. As you can see, the impervious surfaces such as streets, paved roads, sidewalks do not absorb rainwater, and resulting almost 100% of the rainwater becoming stormwater and runoff. So when the ground surface, you probably have seen this several times, multiple times, when the ground surface is almost 100% natural, such as water bodies, vegetation, and soil, only about 10%. That's by by average, but 10% of the rainfall becomes surface runoff. When the development going on, and then you have more impervious surfaces in the urban area, and if the surface area becomes more impervious, and only the runoff, the surface runoff increases 55% of the total rainfall, or other type of precipitation can become runoff, surface runoff. This is the map that some of our students, my previous students, made. This is the map of Daytona Beach, and we used a satellite imagery that has 30 meter by 30 meter resolution. So each pixel is 30 meter by 30 meter. And this red means that these areas have more than 75% of the surface is impervious. Okay, so red means more impervious surfaces. Between 75 and 100% of the area is impervious surfaces, such as rooftops, paved streets, highways, and parking lots. And these blue represent pervious surfaces, such as water. Halifax River is showing low proportion of impervious surfaces. So as you can see, this is like very rough and has a coarse resolution of 30 meter. But you can see most of the eastern part of the Daytona Beach and almost 100% of the peninsula area is impervious surfaces, and which means that more than 50% up to 75% of the rainfall becomes surface runoff. And there's no doubt that we have this flooding problem, and then the non-point source pollution generated from the runoff in this area all the time. So we are looking at the entire Indian River Lagoon. The blue area is Indian River Lagoon, Mukti Lagoon, Indian River, and Banana River, and then we included Halifax. This is one of my graduate students' thesis research, and what he did was that we are using another type of satellite that has 11 meter resolution, 10-meter resolution, and we looked at the elevation and land cover land use, and also the subsurface soil type to calculate potential runoff coefficient. So potential runoff coefficient is the percentage of the rainfall potentially becoming runoff, surface runoff. So as you can see, the areas of highly developed urban areas along Halifax River and then Melbourne, those areas have very high impervious surfaces, and subsurface soil is also different. It's more packed from the development, so which means that more than 70% of rainfall can become the surface runoff. So this potential runoff coefficient is more time independent measure unless you have a big changes in land cover, land use from big development or big restoration projects. So, but then we can calculate runoff depth from it. So runoff depth, the actual amount of rainfall that converts into runoff. So that is the multiplication between the runoff coefficient that I showed you with the mean rainfall. It can be the daily or monthly or annual. So we calculated the runoff depth around the Indian River Lagoon. This is the surrounding watershed, the area that contributes to this water through potentially surface runoff. That's watershed. And we calculate for 11 years from 2006 through 2016 throughout the entire Indian River Lagoon. So what has happened is that I'm just showing the monthly runoff depth that he calculated using satellite imagery. And this is showing the monthly from June, July, August, September, October, November, December of 2011, because that's the year when we had super bloom happen in Indian River Lagoon. So the green color shows the low runoff depth, and red and orange means increasing runoff depth. And we calculated this runoff depth, and as you can see, from September to October of 2011, the increases in rainfall. It rained a lot during a short time period, and you can see the runoff depth increased, and particularly from the areas that are highly developed urban areas. And we compared with Argo Blue maps, and this is another graduate student of mine who graduated in 2014, and his thesis was using another type of satellite imagery to show the development of the algae bloom in Indian River Lagoon. So this shows the water per se. So Indian River Lagoon, water, and this red color, orange color means higher chlorophyll concentration, which is the indirect measure of our algae volume. And this is showing September and October, and as you can see, within very short time period, the algae just bloomed the entire northern part of the Indian River Lagoon and the Mosquito Lagoon, and also Banana River. And that lasted in the month of October. So because this is not, the experimental studies, I can't say it's a cause and effect. There's no, clear explanation I can make which caused what, but there is a very good correlation between the surface runoff from the surrounding area and then the onset of algae bloom. And as the rainfall decreased and the runoff depth decreases, and then algae bloom also subsided that year. So, how does the development in urban area affect rainfall? It makes the runoff water, the volume of runoff water increases. At the same time, it makes the time to reach the peak flow of runoff short. So it can reach the peak runoff flow really quickly if you have a higher amount of impervious surfaces through development. It also makes the total amount of runoff increases because the water cannot be infiltrated into subsurface. So to address these issues, we have extensive detention and retention facilities and drainage ditch system too. So first of all, detention ponds, it's called a pond a lot of times, but it's not a pond because it's mostly dried. And then main purpose of having detention ponds is to channel through the water and then just relieve the area from potential flooding. But having retention pond, which retains water over an extended period, it also adds another benefit of having water quality improvement during the retention time. Okay, so the difference between the detention and retention is whether the water is retained within the basin. There's definitely the pros and cons of having detention over retention ponds. If your primary goal is to relieve the area from potential flooding and your primary goal is to just channel water into somewhere outside of the area, then detention pond is a better option. But if your goal is to improve the water quality, so water quality has to be treated, water has to be treated before it is released into other main water bodies such as Halifax River, Mosquito Lagoon, then the retention pond is a better option. Better yet, you have constructed wetlands I can also show you later. And then there is also ditch, extensive ditch system. The primary function of the ditch is, of course, it reduces flooding potential, but a lot of ditch system is managed by the mosquito control, the county's mosquito control, because their another function is to provide alternative means for mosquito control, because they reduce the water table, the top of the groundwater. Groundwater doesn't have to be underground, but aquifer, the top of the aquifer reduces the water level, and then which reduces the potential breeding, the mosquito breeding ground habitat. So this was a class project, and I had some of my students back in 2013, and they actually looked at the Volusia County Mosquito Control's East Volusia Mosquito Control District ditch system to determine the impact of the fiscally maintained ditch network located through Volusia County, the eastern part of it, Mosquito Control's management jurisdiction, to calculate acreage of the wetlands and acreage of residential areas that are within the discharges, drainages of ditch system. So they looked at the major canal system. They calculated I think that they obtained this information, drainage areas, and then using this information, and they selected the freshwater habitat inside of those ditch drainage, and also they looked at the salt saline habitat, so freshwater and saline habitat that are within ditch drainage system. They also looked at the census block polygon where most of residential areas are located within this area. And they also looked at the census data, the population. So what they have found is that approximately 56% of land cover are within the ditch system, drainage, and about 77% of the wetlands, the entire wetlands, are within the drainage network, ditch drainage network. Um, so 56% of the East Volusia County, Muskegon District, and 20% of the entire Volusia County residential areas are within the ditch drainage network. So which means that, most of our um, runoff, our area, where you live, where you work, what we put out from our households or streets are running into this ditch. You think the ditches are there, and like you don't even realize that they are there a lot of times, but they are very connected to our living and residential, and then whatever that we put out, and then plus the ditch drainage system canals that are connected to retention ponds. So what I'm trying to say is, these how extensive the retention pond and drain ditch systems, and then how they are really part of what our daily lives are. So, and then I was personally interested in retention ponds and drainage ditches. That was very coincidence, because as Kelly said, I was a seagrass biologist before I moved to Daytona Beach, and then I did most of marsh work, and then so I moved from Mississippi before I came, and then that was in 2011, and before that I was in South Louisiana. Well, Louisiana also has a lot of flooding problem, of course, and then Mississippi too, but they don't have this extensive retention ponds and drain ditch system. So when I moved to Daytona Beach in 2011, I was just amazed by all these number of man-made water bodies. And a lot of times they just pass by, they think, it's not very clean and pretty. But if you look into it, it has a beautiful ecosystem. And then my major, actually, what the plants that I studied in Lake Pontchartrain, Louisiana, had not just seagrass, but it has very freshwater, brackish water systems. So I'm familiar with other type of submerged aquatic vegetation, freshwater and brackish water. So whenever I go to grocery stores, or I stop by bank or a restaurant, and I just went down to the nearby retention ponds and drain ditches, and I started surveying, just personal hobby, as a personal hobby. So I had a pair of boots and photo cameras all the time. So that's how I started my interest in surveying of these plants in retention ponds and drainage ditches. So I'm going to show you some of those plants that I documented, and these are some pictures of ditches, canals, and ponds in this area. And the primary area that I surveyed was from the Halifax River Urban Watershed, from Ormond Beach down to Port Orange, but I did some surveys in the Deltona areas as well, so a little bit towards west. So when I compiled probably about 100 or so species from these urban aquatic systems, and I compiled and classified them based on their plant zonation. So zone 1 is, deep water, but it's shallow still. Open water, so you have floating leaves, floating free-floating plants, and also rooted submerged plants. Shallow water, you can have floating leaves, and also you can have emergent plants, and then you can have wet meadow plants. You can have some wetland trees and bushes as well. So I'll show you some of the plants. This is actually not a plant, it's a fern, muscular fern, and that they turn red color as they mature. And then you probably call everything duckweed, but I found several species of duckweeds, leaf duckweeds, Valdivia duckweeds, and giant duckweeds. And we had, this is non-native. If it's in red, it's non-native species, Salvinia minima. And this is bladderwort. This one is carnivorous plant. And we have non-native water hyacinths, but their flowers are so pretty. We have frog bed, and we have Nymphia odorata. I think this was retention ponds along the Dunn Avenue. They're very beautiful. Yes, American white water lily, and we had yellow pond lily. This is muskgrass. Muskgrass is not vascular plant either. This is an algae, but they look like vascular plants. And similar to this, but this one is vascular plant. It's called crontail. It is vascular plant, but they are not really rooted in the soil. We have Baldwin's spike rush. There are vascular plants submerged. We have native Canadian water weed. This is native species. Very close to, very similar to this, we also had non-native Brazilian waterweed. And this is a freshwater species. They can also tolerate some salt, Nahas guadalupensis. So these were found some retention ponds close to the Halifax River. And similar to the Nahas, this is another type of pondweed, small pondweed. That's the flower of it. Valisneria americana, American wild celery. And this is Hygrophila polysperma. This is one of the type of arrowhead, submerged type of arrowhead, Sagittaria subulata. We have several species of Sagittaria. This is another submerged floating leaved Sagittaria, very tiny, thread leaf arrowhead. And this is Luxiola fluitans, Ludwigia repens. You will see this a lot of times. And this is non-native, Myriophyllum aquaticum parafeather. This is called baby's tear. This is called false pimpernel, and it has very pretty lavender color flowers. I also found several species of Iliacaris, dwarf spike rush. This is rather common. And this is a larger version of Iliacaris, a species of Iliacaris horsetail spike rush. You can see the ribs here. And this is similar to the first one, the one before this, but this is called Iliacaris cellulosa, Gulf Coast spike sedge, spike rush, spike sedge. There is rush, but common name, sometimes they call it spike sedge. And then another type of Iliacaris obtusa, blunt spike rush. And non-native alligator weed. And this is also non-native, but very common. You will see it along the shores of retention ponds everywhere, Panicum repens. This is polygonum species, have different colors of flowers. You will see this a lot of times. They are popular when using in landscape, Pontidaria cordata, pickerelweed. This is another popular pond shoreline landscaping plants, Sagittaria lancifolia, bulltongue, arrowhead. This is similar to that, but a creeping burrowhead. This one is non-native elephant ear, very similar looking to this, but we also have native arrow arm or tokahu. A lot of people like this lizard tail, very pretty. And this is very tiny Bacopa munier. You will see this all the time. It's like a blanket, okay? But you don't see how perfect their flowers are. You know, like they're very tiny, but if you look at very closely, they are perfect flowers. This is more rare, but it's also Bacopa, one of the species in Bacopa genus, and it's called blue water hyssop or lemon Bacopa, because if you crush these leaves, it smells like a lemon. And I also found several hydrocotyledon species. This is coinwort, pennywort, right? So one of the pennywort species, hydrocotyledon, ranunculoids, this is floating leaves, and hydrocotyledon umbrellata, and this is a tiny long marsh pennywort, and this is a large leaf pennywort. So we have several species of pennywort. We have another species of pennywort, Hydrocotyledon verticillata. And then close to, very similar to pennywort, but this is called coinwort, Centella asiatica. Then this one is called ponyfoot, very tiny. So I have about 100 or so species, and then this one that I'm showing right here is the number of the flowers, the plants that I found only along the International Speedway Boulevard. The water ditches are along the Speedway Boulevard. And then more species are available in the book. They are also available in PDF. So if anybody wants to see it, I can send you the link to the PDF copy of it. But when I was surveying in early 2011, 12, 13, and 14, there were a lot more wet areas, but there are now probably 30% of them are gone just from, since 2014 to current date. So we are losing these important water habitats because these urban waterways not only serve as stormwater management facility, but they also provide important habitats for reptiles, amphibians, and of course invertebrates and fish, and of course the birds. Birds like to use them all the time. So out of entire species, about 50 species were true aquatic species, which means that they require standing water. And about 17 of them, so 9 of them were non-native or prohibited plants in Florida. But they didn't really, I didn't really find really bad cases of invasive plant problems in those areas. So well-managed ponds and ditches. When I say well-managed, they are frequently mowed and then they get cleaned up. The total number of species are also low and diversity is low, but therefore non-native species are also low. But however, we know that they provide very important habitats and serve diverse functions, not just the stormwater management. So we should think about a different way to manage instead of just mowing down to the shore and just cleaning up all these plants. A different type of management strategy may be needed. So while I was doing those kind of surveys, it actually gave me a new direction of research. So as you can see, I did seagrass restoration in Gulf Coast, and then I came here and I was using more satellite imagery and GIS type of work, and this, surveys of retention ponds were just my personal hobby. But I was walking the entire area along the ditch and retention ponds. Okay, this is Nova Canal. I'm walking toward south. And when I was walking, I found these plants. But you probably think, oh my goodness, they are probably invasive, they're dirty, and they're just choking these waterways. But in fact, the water was very clear, maybe that day, but and then all these species, they are not invasive, they're very healthy native species of submerged aquatic. They actually help clear water. And then so I was walking towards south, and this is where the Nova meets with Reed Canal. And yeah, you have floating leaves or floating vegetation. They're blocking the waters, and then you can see with the garbage, and but still water flows and it goes out through Reed Canal. So this is the Reed Canal. I turned from Nova and then Reed Canal. This is Vallisneria, American wild celery, very important freshwater and brackish water submerged aquatic vegetation. They're growing very healthy, as you can see, important fisheries habitat. And then it leads to the mouth of the Reed Canal. And we know that there's a really deep muck at the mouth of the Reed Canal. So as I walking through this, and I was like, how these waterways have been connected in the city, and I was really interested in stormwater. And the area that I showed you, I was walking down Nova and then turn Reed Canal. So if you're from Daytona Beach area, you probably are very familiar with this area. Reed Canal is one of the three major outfall canals that drains the Halifax River urban watershed into Halifax River. So we had 11th Street Canal, which is also called LPGA Canal, Reed Canal, and then this is Halifax Canal. So we have these three urban drainage area, and Reed Canal actually drains the southern part of the Daytona Beach and South Daytona. Very important canal. It looks like a very small, but it drains the entire area. So the Reed Canal outfall, the stormwater runoff is collected in the canal from the entire surrounding area, and it flows out into Halifax. So if you have all these floating plants that can become added organic matter, and we have garbage that goes out, so that causes the problems in Halifax River, contributes nutrient and sediment impairment issues into already impaired Halifax River. So I was looking at this area to find where that we can do some infiltration before the urban runoff water through the canal goes out into Halifax River. This is a very highly developed area in South Daytona, and then there was a little pond. It was directed water diversion pond that South Daytona, city of South Daytona, along with I think St. John's River Water Management District, they constructed about 20 years ago. So they already had some kind of water diversion. That portion of the canal can be diverted and then increase the retention time. But this entire area was kind of abandoned. This was used as a dump site of the, what is the word that I'm trying to find? After they dig, I can't remember the name. So they dumped uh, what I'm trying to say.
Is it fill
Okay.
material?
Yes,
Dredge and
but
fill?
yes, dredge material. So they were using this area to dump the dredge material from the Halifax River. Okay, so thank you, Kelly. So we were meeting with South Daytona, and then there was an opportunity from Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program for funding for restoration. So we wrote grant, and then we um, had engineer design to lower the elevation to the previous wetland elevation, and then we added um, wet area using mangroves, and then we planted this shoreline as well. So sediment has to be excavated and elevation grading to previous wetland level, and then we have to clear out some of the species, non-native species such as Brazilian pepperweed, and this is a picture during the construction. So this is how it looked like previously, and then this is right after we completed the construction of treatment wetland. So this is the added part of the pond, and we planted along the shore and also in the pond and also here too. So right after we finished the construction, this is how it looked like from the aerial view. So it looked like there was nothing. We actually, cleared a lot of vegetation that were there. However, and then we actually saw total nitrogen and phosphate increase during the construction. This is construction because we have to use the curtains, and all the things that we are disturbing were just concentrated within the pond. So of course, nitrogen and phosphate increased, the level increased during the construction. But then after the construction, they soon, decreased to the previous level. Okay, I don't have the additional monitoring data because usually you can see the impact of the treatment wetland after 2-3 years of the construction. So turbidity, of course, increased, but then we know that it was just during the construction part of it. So after that, everything went down to the previous level, and we are hoping to see the improvement of water nutrients and then sediment value because these mangroves are growing. And then last time we were out there, the mangroves were a lot bigger than this was. And this is a sum of the view that my students were measuring and surveying the growth of mangroves. It was about 2 years ago, I think. So this just completes, there are some examples of the values of the stormwater system and how we can actually restore some of the area, even in very highly developed urban area, to help improve the water quality that's coming from the urban area before it reaches the estuarine environment. And I am not sure if this is something that Kelly expected me to present,
Yeah.
but this is what I had.
Yes. And, Dr. Cho, this is a really great primer because, our top were each of these LID workshops, we're exploring a different aspect of low impact development, green infrastructure. And our first LID workshop that we had all the way back in March, we at the conclusion, it was a pretty general workshop, and we ended with more questions than we had answers for. And so we identified some topics that we thought as a community we needed to explore. And when I say community, I mean developers, builders, residents, nonprofit organizations, governmental agencies, native plant societies, schools, universities, and we realized that we needed to have an ongoing conversation. And so we started these workshops, and the aesthetics and maintenance of low impact development is a common theme. So you've done, Dr. Cho, a lot of restoration, a lot of shoreline planting, and we've done some as well. And I'm going to tell a little story about one of our projects, and then Dr. Cho, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about one of your projects. So we did a living shoreline restoration last year during COVID, and it was grant funded, and it was a wonderful experience. And the native plants that we planted along the Mosquito Lagoon, they took off, and we were able to have students, actually some of Louisa's former students from Spruce Creek High School participate, and they learned how to do a quadrat analysis, which is where you look at a 1 meter by 1 meter section of the area that you're replanting, and you identify the type of plants, which Dr. Cho, you showed us a great example of a lot of these plants, and sort of the coverage area. And it was really interesting to look at. And we had almost a whole year of really great data collection, and it was very, very exciting. And the plants did so well that we're fairly confident that we had almost no runoff from that section, because the plant became very, very established. And then we had a member of the public complained that it was looking weedy and unkempt, and that that this area should be better maintained. And so a lot of the plants that we planted ended up getting mowed down. And we learned a lot about public perception of this sort of this desire to have perfectly manicured aesthetic. And our plants actually taught us some lessons about that, which is many of them didn't mind getting mowed at all. We had a plants called Sunshine Mimosa, and they not only didn't mind getting mowed, they're almost out competing the St. Augustine grass throughout the whole park area that we planted. And so what we realized is we needed, and this is something Dr. Jason Evans with Stetson taught us about, which are cues to care, right? So if we had some visuals sort of explaining the plants and the plant value, perhaps we would have some, some different outcomes. But I know that landscape stormwater ponds, they get mowed and they get sprayed on a regular basis, and that's sort of the standard go-to for a lot of the folks that do the maintenance. And and so Dr. Cho, can you share a little bit about the project that you did where you had homeowners? It was a living shoreline experiment, and you had some properties that were planted and others that weren't, and some of the feedback that you got from the property owners.
Yes. So we were funded by EPA through 319 grant, and then that project just ended in June, and we, as Kelly said, the area was in New Smyrna Beach, Edgewater, and Oak Hill, and we selected 30 waterfront sites. Majority of them are residential because we wanted to include residential, and we're comparing the runoff, surface runoff, well, I'm sorry, the buffering of surface runoff between native plants and turf grass, because turf grass is the primary grass that is used in public parks and privately owned residential areas. So before I talk about the owners, property owners' responses, I want to just share, because I just finished writing my final proposal, and then there is some promising results that even within 2 years of planting, we used both salt marsh plants in Mosquito Lagoon side and then freshwater species in pond side. They, the living shorelines had a better filtration of nitrogen and I think it's sediment. So some of them were better compared to turf grass. Of course, turf grass has a. I'm not saying turf grass is bad, because that is one of the cover that Florida Department DP is really pushing, and that has 100% cover of the plants, but they're constantly mowed. So there is not much of accumulation of organic matter, and then the mowed grass can be blown into the water that adds organic matter as well. So, and then if you want to manage your turf grass, you have to, a lot of people are dependent on the companies, and they don't know what's in, like how they manage their turf grass. So if we have a question about, do you use pesticide, do you use fertilizer, they don't know. And actually, I don't know about my place either, because I'm part of the HOA, and they manage my lawn. So I don't know how it's managed. And the HOA is one of the biggest components that anybody who wants to do living shoreline projects have to work with, because there are some of them are really large company. They cover the entire area, entire portion of the Florida, and what they use and how they manage. What do you mean by the management? And it's of course the individual residential owners are very important, but these large lawn caring companies are the ones that people have to work with. And it's not the educator, because they probably know much more than we do about managing and landscaping, but we definitely have to have more conversation and inclusion in this type of forum. And because I found HOA is the biggest hurdle to recruit people, because even if the people homeowners want to be part of it, just because they are in some kind of subdivision, they're part of the HOA, they are not allowed to do certain things on their backyards. And we got a lot of positive feedback as well as not so good. But so we reached out, probably we sent out invitation to more than 100, not 100, I think it was like between 80 or 90 residential homes in the beginning, because we looked at the satellite imagery, Google Earth, and then find the areas that meet our criteria. And we sent out, of course, letters, and then we got probably less than 10% of responses. So we did workshop at Marine Discovery Center to recruit people, solicit participants, and then we actually had the students go out and then knock their doors as well. But most of people who had a concern, of course, the biggest concern is they're afraid that living shoreline will block their waterfront view. And the second most thing is, like they're afraid of having maybe snakes or gators. And then, yeah, but HOA is the biggest thing. But those people who had concern, they just choose not to be part of it. And amongst those people who are working with us, and probably more than 70% of people were very happy. And some of the concerns that we had amongst those participants were, it was very hard to maintain when they try to mow and then just leave those areas. And the rest of them, they just, like moved, and then they didn't let us know that they were moving. So we lost some of the participants like that. But we had also very positive spillover impact, like the sites that we use as control, which means that we didn't do anything. Some of the control sites, one or two, they actually looked at their neighboring living shoreline. They requested to have a living shoreline and worked with the contractor that we hired. And then we just did the follow-up interviews with the participants, and two of the participants, they wanted to continue the living shoreline. They actually wanted to add more living shoreline, including, oyster reef bags and things like that in front of their the planted shore. So some very good positive, but yeah, of course, there are always, some concerns coming from the people. The floating mats, it's very clear, some people really like, but some sites are not very doing good. Sometimes, because they have to be replaced. The floating mats, the B mats, they have to be replaced every year. And if they don't do it, then they can become, kind of an eyesore, because it just has a lot of weed growing. It can, but as well as they have the annual maintenance of it. It really is helping absorbing additional nutrients from the water column, and then provide additional habitat underwater as well.
That's really interesting, and it's very heartening to see this sort of continuity that it's sort of breaking through and creating a new paradigm for what is aesthetically pleasing. And yeah, so, and I'm seeing a couple of the comments here, talking about spraying and the use of pesticides. And it's funny because the use of these herbicides along the shorelines can be really persistent in the water column, and some of them can bioaccumulate. which means that they can be passed up from one organism to the next organism. So I'm wondering if anybody on today's call has any examples of success stories where stormwater ponds were managed effectively and where people were happy with the outcome. You can unmute or you can raise your hand. And the silence is deafening, and it's not unexpected.
I think Melissa has a comment. Hi,
Lisa?
Melissa.
Did you
Hi,
have
Dr. J. How are you doing?
I'm doing very good.
I don't know of any in our area, sorry to say, but I'm wondering, in terms of changing minds and being kinder to a shoreline, the only thing that I've heard about, and it was a high school student's project, I believe, is the Rose Bay restoration. That's all I've heard about. And Jenny had posted in the chat that education is key. Even people choose to become educated. They self-select. So you never know how you're going to flip a switch for someone. The numbers of people that are attending these LID seminars is heartening. And there are groups and groups of people that work all the time trying to educate about these things. And it's hard. So I don't know, maybe someone can talk about Rose Bay. I just bring it up because that was a group of citizens that adopted something different for their shoreline.
Yeah, that's a great question. Louise, are you still on the line? Louise Chapman is the expert. Oh, so her phone, she just sent me a text. Her audio's offline right now. So she's going to join us back. When she joins, she can talk to us about Rose Bay. But yes, and Melissa, you're exactly right. Rose Bay, it took the whole community to do that restoration. The city of Port Orange and the county invested a lot of money in stormwater treatment. They actually created Bushman Park. I don't know if anybody's been to Bushman Park in Port Orange, but that is an area, that whole stormwater system is a beautiful park. I think a lot of people that go there don't even know it's a stormwater system, but it was designed to capture that runoff before it enters Spruce Creek. And one of Dr. Cho's slides at the very, very beginning of her presentation showed, what does a natural system do? If it's an undeveloped area that is in its natural state, whether that's, in an estuary environment or a freshwater environment, 40% of the water that comes down is returned to the sky. So that whole concept of evapotranspiration, I sort of see that's reverse rainfall, right? So if we have plants, they actually can, when the water seeps in, the shallow infiltration, that water is taken up into plants process it, and water is actually released back into the air. We have 25% of it can go down deep, do deep infiltration after it's been filtered by the plants and the sediments and go into our aquifer. But, if we have impervious surfaces, sidewalks, gray infrastructure, hardened grounds, rooftops, without that infiltration of the water, inundation of the water, percolation of the water, that water just flows, right? And so it accumulates, and then we have to manage and engineer it. Dr. Cho also started her talk with the discussion of these canal systems, right? So back in the day, it was ditch it, and then let all the water flow out into the main water bodies, and then you can have you can have drier land. But I'm circling back, Melissa, to your original point about Spruce Creek, which is, so the stormwater was just one part of that whole process of restoring Rose Bay. There was a many year effort to retrofit the homes that were adjacent to Rose Bay that were on septic systems. They retrofitted all of those homes onto main sewer utilities. And actually, this is a really good sort of introduction to, we're going to have sort of a flash Zoom meeting tomorrow that wasn't planned originally, but there's timing. The timing is interesting. The county council had a meeting this week where they're talking about how they're going to spend the COVID money. And all of the local governments have to make these decisions. And one of the options that the county council has is using some of that money for water quality. There's a water quality project in Oak Hill. There's several on the west side of Volusia County that will improve Blue Spring and Gemini Spring. And the county council is going to have a workshop next Tuesday. And so we're going to host a Zoom call with Mike Ulrich, who is the Volusia County Utilities Director, tomorrow. And we are going to learn about and be able to ask him questions about some of these water quality projects. And so I'll be sending around a Zoom link for folks to join us, because a workshop that of elected officials, the public cannot engage, but this is the kind of conversation that we need to be having, and to let our leaders know, what our values are. And so I think, let's see, we have two folks that have raised their hands. Let me see. Okay, yeah, so tomorrow at 2:00, that's a good question. Louise, are you with us? Jenny, can you unmute? I see your hands raised.
I am with you.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, Louise is here.
Yes.
Okay,
Did
so
you tell-
yeah, Louise, can you give us your perspective from what Rose Bay before it was restored, what you were seeing, what you saw as it was being restored, and sort of the trends on the plants around Rose Bay?
So there have been huge changes. When I first started going out to the Bay, and even into the 90s, 1994, 95, there was very little mangroves in the northern end of the Spruce Creek Preserve, because Volusia was too cold and they would die off every year. And now, so we have been restoring with a lot of mangroves, and now they are taking over even all the grasslands. When I first started working at the Bay, you could actually see large pieces of fecal material floating in the Bay. You would not have wanted to walk in it. There were not the retention ponds, septics were leaking into the Bay. The bridge was blocked underneath. Over the last 25 years or so that I have had the privilege of working out there, the quality of the water has improved significantly. We've actually had ulva, which is sea lettuce, some of those things come and go. We have less, spartina, but we have been planting different mangroves and watching the changes in the shoreline. Water does come up higher, but the water is clearer and cleaner, and there's less oyster beds, but we've dredged that part of the bay, so it's a bit deeper. And we're trying to work on over the last 2 years, I'm sad to say that about 80% of what we have done for restoration with native plants in the park has been taken over by Brazilian pepper and a lot of invasives because of the influx of, storm surges that have kept water at high levels. But at the bay, the shorelines are so much better than when I first started coming out there and working with students out there. So I think that there's been a lot less, wastewater going into the bay. There's been huge appreciation at first. And Katrina will remember that we used to go out when we were in the volunteer mode and, replant dunes and do all of that. And people were welcoming, but they really didn't like the weeds. That's what they thought the native plants were. So it took a long time of the county and Katrina and a lot of the people educating people about what native plants look like and grow like and how much they add to the health of the environment and the water. So I think maybe over the last 15 years, there's been less pushback and less distress. Originally, even in my town, which is Port Orange, when people planted native plants, people were very upset by that. They thought they were, unattractive. And then now they, I think, are beginning to gain some, milkweed bringing the butterflies and more things, bringing things. But along the shoreline, what is there anything specific? Like when we first started working out there and we would knock on the doors in Harbor Oaks and explain what we were doing and would they be willing and all of that, people were curious, but more concerned. I listened to Jay and she talked about how people were worried it would block their view and it would affect their, they were scared to put some of the plants in because then they couldn't launch their little kayaks or boats. But I think that's changed significantly as the health of the bay has improved significantly. We just did a poll July 12th and 13th with our 70-foot seine, and we got a lot of seahorses, and there was biodiversity like we've never had before. So, and they are all, belong there, not unusual, but a wide variety. I mean, there's lizardfish and all kinds of things that we didn't see for quite a while and we're seeing again. Does that answer your question, Kelly?
Yeah, that's fantastic, Louise. Thank you so much. There's such a rich knowledge base that's on this call. It's really amazing. So Jenny, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Kelly. And thank you so much, Jay. I always love hearing you speak. So appreciate your work. Similar to Jay, except that I don't have a scientific background, but I'm obsessed with ponds. Every pond I see, I almost have to stop and take a picture. And I'm obsessed with the ones that are not shaved. And out LPGA, I want to say out by Clyde Morris, it's kind of out that way. It seems like there's a couple ponds, I don't know, detention or retention. They seem to have water every time I see them. They seem to be the natural type. They seem to be non-shaven. They seem to have just natural stuff around the edges. And as far as I can see, they're not being sprayed with herbicides. I never see anything that looks brown like it's been sprayed. But I've never found who to ask about those ponds, but they look really nice. And I would love to see more like that because we have a shaved pond on ISB on my side of the beach side of ISB, and I pass by it every time I walk over the ISB bridge, and I'm obsessed with how sad it makes me, that shaved pond.
Yeah, that's a good point. And some of that has to do with who manages the ponds, right? So there are some canals and ponds that were put in by the Florida Department of Transportation. Some of these canals are managed by the county. Some canals and ponds are managed by cities. Some ponds and canals are managed by homeowners associations. And so, it's a lot of it is about resources. And Jenny, as you mentioned in your chat box there about education, but it's also about cost. And we know that over the lifetime of one of these stormwater ponds, if it's incorporated into the community design, is much less costly than engineered gray structure. So in the long term, the cost of replacing and renewing over, let's say, a 20-year time period is less, but the maintenance cost, right? It can be the weekly maintenance cost until we have a system that's in place and that's incentivized, and requirements for not spraying, right, and not mowing to the edges. It's an uphill battle, because people are, oh, it's a weed, I'm gonna hack it down. It's a little bit more complicated, but we have seen some hybrids that I'm going to try to share a picture now. And let's see. All right. Can you see this? This photo that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is this is a photo of a stormwater pond in Victoria Park in West Volusia. And this is a man-made pond. And but you can see some tall trees there. So all of the trees that were planted around this pond were done strategically. They planted the trees in between the homes. So you'll see a home, a tree, a home, a tree, a home, a tree, so that at no point during the life cycle of that tree growth is that homeowner going to have an obstructed view. Now, there's some things that this pond you can see is, mowed right to the edge. And, my guess is when the water table's a little bit lower, you can probably see that they've actually sprayed. But, this is, one step better than just a barren stormwater pond that gets mowed and sprayed right to the edges.
Well, I
Yeah.
liked what you said. I think it was Kelly that you said about the cues to care with possibly a signage identifying the possible plants. I even thought of a sign. How many plants can you spot? How many different plants can you spot on the sign and make it fun?
Yeah, and something that has sort of inspired me is watching these plants that we planted go through their life cycle, right? So watching them bloom and flower and seed is really amazing. And some of the tiniest flowers are the coolest things. And so if we can get people to appreciate those things, so maybe our signage needs to show more of, the cycle, and not just, don't tread here, or, something that's sort of the generic signs that we have, that we usually see. But I like the idea of getting creative. And let's see, Lisa, you've got a really interesting point. Lisa Mickey, about the golf association.
Yeah, I mean, I started thinking about it when Dr. Cho started her presentation. She was talking about impervious surfaces. And as some of you know, in my other life, I do a lot of writing for golf publications, but I'm specifically involved in doing a lot more environmental writing for the United States Golf Association. And they actually have some very solid science going on. just wrote this note here about the Natural Capital Project, which is, they were basically looking at very much like urban planners, except what is the value of this green space in our communities, and what does it translate to? One of the things that, you know, made me think about this was one of the things that a lot of golf courses are doing are ripping out their cart paths, you know, like the cement cart paths, and using more like a gravel or shell type thing. A lot of them are removing chunks of the parking lots and creating little retention areas with plants that will absorb, you know, a lot of, well, the water, control the water so that it's not a sheet of water going through parking lots. So there's a lot of really good stuff going on that you don't, it's kind of out of the mainstream. And I know, you know, again, golf tends to be kind of sometimes isolated, but I can tell you, I just did another huge story for a magazine, and actually was working with the Golf Superintendents Association of America. And what they did was they have all 50 states in the United States have come up with best practices for strategies for golf course superintendents in terms of nutrient, water usage, chemicals, all kinds of stuff. And it's very, very exciting, because it's actually one little tiny segment of our world out here that's actually saying, well, here's what we can do, and let's try this. And they're doing it. And their states, their respective states, and the umbrella organization is holding their feet to the fire, saying, we want you to do this. And the goal is to reduce water usage, because it's becoming an incredible situation, as we know, and particularly in the western part of the United States. I love the fact that people are using native coastal plants. I love the fact that they're creating pollinator gardens and wildlife corridors, and they even know what an impervious surface is. So, you know, I just, you know, I think we need a little flicker of hope sometimes. And, you know, Dr. Cho has shown us some wonderful things that are actually out there. I thought they were just murky old ponds, and I couldn't believe she's out there tromping around in places where I'm sure she was going to be bitten by a water moccasin. But I think there is a lot of good things if we just look for them, and they're all around us.
Really good point, Lisa. And Melissa is put in the chat box, I wonder if the training for the golf supervisors could be repurposed for homeowners association. So for example, putting that in the covenants and landscape direction. And Melissa, that's a really good question. And in fact, you know, we've got one of our speakers next week is Dr. Wendy Anderson, and she's been taking me on tours of stormwater ponds here in West Volusia. And she's on the homeowners association, you know, Victoria Park Homeowners Association. And, you know, she'll tell us it's a struggle, right? Because every single time, you know, they have in their overall plans for the development, the ponds must be maintained with native vegetation. They do community plantings in areas. And inevitably, there's a new person that joins the maintenance company and decides, I'm gonna mow everything, you know, right down to the edge. And they planted trees in one of their on one of their ponds, and it was you know, completely mowed down, a community planting. But so it's a constant a constant educational battle, I think, to keep that going. Does anybody else have any examples of, you know, sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly of stormwater ponds?
Kelly, we have that same sort of battle on school campuses when people plant the pollinator gardens and the native plant gardens around the ponds, the septic and retention ponds, and then they want to gate them off so that no one can gain access on the campuses. And the other thing is that our maintenance people prefer to be able to mow on large mowers right through. So
Mhm.
they just mow everything down as well.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And after our low impact development workshop earlier this week, I received a message from someone who said, because the county and the local governments often take over the maintenance of these large scale infrastructure projects. So once the developer leaves, if it becomes a public amenity, the local government has to maintain it. One way to potentially add value, now this would be a fee, is these areas could self-tax, right? They could add a fee to their, to their properties and have the county actually maintain it to a higher level. So, that's complicated, but it's an interesting idea. And so I just shared a picture of, this is Dr. Wendy Anderson again, back at, I think it's Victoria Gardens in DeLand. This is a different stormwater pond, and this is one of the first ones that they did. And you can see the cypress trees in the background, and you can see the cypress knees, and there's some pickerel weed in the area. And this has become a park, an amenity. They've got benches in the shade of these trees. They've got dog walking stations with doggy bags there. And, it's you don't have to maintain it as much because you've got the healthy vegetation. So this is an example of one sort of step better than what I shared with the last picture where they just planted trees. But these cypress trees, actually, each one of them can absorb 8,000 gallons of water a year. And so when we're talking about, how do we, rising waters, the rising water table, having trees planted is a really good standard, right? It's a best practice for flood control. So the higher typically the vegetation, the deeper the roots system. And that's something that native plants are really, really well adapted to our areas. And they're adapted to the swings of the dry times and the wet times. And they can survive without a lot of fertilizers, really any fertilizer. And they work with the wildlife, because what you see when we have our pesticides and our herbicides and we kill off this natural annual cycle, normally when baby birds are hatching in the springtime, if we don't have the native larva feeding on native plants, then these baby birds don't have food. And so you see this, that our ecological systems, our trophic zones, or the energetic zones of our environment, they become askew and they just miss each other. And so by having more native plants and natural areas, we're trying to basically reclaim the natural systems of our local habitats. Okay, so let me take a look at our questions here to see if anybody has their hand up. Okay, we did have a really good question. So how did we get people to adopt this aesthetic? Okay, so in one case, in the case of the photo that I just shared, the organization that planned that pond designed the entire community around the concept of quality of life. And so that thought process, so people bought into that, right? They were looking for improved quality of life. And in fact, next week, next Wednesday, Dr. Wendy Anderson, we're going to be talking with a lot of realtors, and we're going to be hearing from them what it is, people who are buying properties in the community, what are they looking for, and what sells. And the preliminary conversations that I've been having with realtors is, of course, a water view, right? A water view and an unobstructed water view. So, you know, sort of taking into account that we know that when we plant plants, we need to anticipate the long-term management. And by planting these staggered trees, that's a real easy way. That's a cue. It's not necessarily a cue to care, but it removes an obstacle for the homeowners. It's not something that's going to become an issue for them over time. Yeah, and Jenny, you were talking about it's a great opportunity to raise the bar on the landscaping industry. You know, Katrina actually had this idea a while ago, which is to create a certification program for landscape professionals who maintain green infrastructure. And that concept has gained a lot of traction. And we learned earlier this week that you know, the University of Florida, they are they're really they're eager to help develop that system. And but you know, sometimes it's one step forward, two steps back, and until we have, you know, sort of consistent messaging and people having an appreciation of native plants and appreciating that aesthetic, getting over that hurdle of that added maintenance, it really is an uphill battle. Oh yeah, so another comment, from grass mowers to plant tenders. I really like that. And when you get your hands dirty, it can become something that's very powerful for folks who you know, appreciate the plants in their yards. So I really like that idea. Oh, Lisa says residential communities can become certified Audubon sanctuaries through Audubon International if they want to raise the bar on environmental standards. That's a really good idea, as is the Florida Green Building Coalition, FGBC. They're going to be presenting next Thursday evening, and they have certification programs. So entire communities that are being developed can get certified. So you can have a green home, you can have a green community, you can have a green local government. And in fact, Volusia County is a certified green county through FGBC. And that takes accountability, right? Every few years, the county has to document and prove that they're continuing to make strides in order to be recertified. So I think that accountability is something that is, I think, important, so that we don't get into a sort of a greenwashing situation. Kathy has her hand up.
Yes, I came into the meeting late, so I don't know exactly all that was covered in the presentation, but I live across from a retention pond, and it was hit by that tornado back in August last year. And all of the remnant trees, which weren't doing that great anyway, were lost. They had to be cut down eventually, what was left of them after the tornado. And this is a county area that's enclosed within the Delancey limits. Is there a way to somehow request that we get trees replanted? Is there any good way that could be recommended to address the poor condition of this particular retention pond?
That's a really good question. So are you within a particular neighborhood community, or are you in an area that sort of predates the planned neighborhoods?
Yes, it's an older neighborhood. If you're familiar with the George Marks area of DeLand, it's
Oh.
right in that vicinity.
Yes, okay.
So no homeowners
George
association.
Marks. Okay, great. I do know that area. And you're talking to the right people, because we can certainly make that request. And after our call, I can contact you, and we can have that conversation, because there is grant funding available for publicly maintained properties. And in fact, Katrina has done several programs in West Volusia for planting some of these areas. So that's a great question.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's one of those that just gets mowed, and that's really the only maintenance that we have there.
Right. Very good. Yeah, we did some mapping of the area, and we were looking at, I think 2 years ago, places that could be ripe for planting. And then, of course, that tornado sort of changes everything. So,
and unfortunately, some of what's wanting to come back are the rain trees, invasives.
Yeah, those golden rain trees. And people also get attached to their, some of these invasive and exotic plants. I know several people who absolutely refuse to cut down the Brazilian pepper because it's so large that it screens their property from their neighbors, right? And so having a substitute, having an alternative to plant when we remove these exotics, I think can really help as well. We're definitely seeing that. And Melissa's writing, economy of scale changes things. Someone with a riding lawnmower can do a lot of yards and, maintain a lot of areas very, very quickly, right? Quick and easy.
That comment was many minutes ago to what Jenny had written, but it's something that concerns me, because there are a lot of informal landscaping groups, and it may be a guy who owns 2 riding mowers and a truck, and he can deploy his guys, and they're making, I don't know, maybe they're making $10 an hour. At some point that'll be 15 an hour. But it's a lot of folks. A neighborhood like mine, it used to be that the dads mowed the lawns. They don't anymore. It's somebody with a riding mower, and it takes them approximately 15 minutes to do a lawn, and they're getting, 30, 40, $50 every time once a week when they come out and get on that riding mower. And for public person, I know we're talking about bigger areas, but that economic aspect of it I think has to be part of a consideration. How do you how do you monetize it for landscape workers and landscape?
Or if we could even get them to back off the mowing, like mow half as often, or even less than half as often. I mean, they mow so often that we have this tight, tiny, short grass.
Well, they mow so often that they have to water, and then they water too much, and then they get the dollar weed, and they have to put the poison on the dollar weed. And then, I mean, I watch my neighbors do this. I don't have an irrigation system. What grass I have, what St. Augustine I have left in my yard is as green as theirs. I mow it to 5 inches. I keep it tall in the summer.
Exactly, and it's lush and green.
I mean, it's euophyphus. Anyway, that's enough out of me on that topic. I'm a little bit crazy on it.
Oh,
Kelly, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. Something that I noticed when the economy went south after 2008, 2009, the local government budgets really declined. They declined extremely rapidly. And something that is a big part of our tax bills is the maintenance of these areas. And one of the things that was discussed first as a cost savings measure was mowing less frequently. And, you know, they did a whole PR campaign, you know, the islands in the roadways are going to be taller. But they quantified, you know, how much we were saving by doing that. But then there was a great a movement. There was a wildflower foundation that actually became engaged and helped create best practices for public works departments. And they planted flowers, right? And so there's sort of more of a meadow, you know, as opposed to a lawn. And nowadays you'll see a lot more flowering plants in these berms adjacent to roadways now. And yeah, Melissa.
Yeah, we've been looking at the Popeye chapter. There's a section of roadway that we maintain that's FDOT roadway, and they completely mow down the wildflowers while they are flowering, even though their website proclaims their the benefit of the wildflowers. And we have written them and asked them to please mow just the immediately adjacent shoulder. That's important for safety reasons, and to not mow until after the flowers have set seed. We'll see where that goes. But when I looked at the map of the Wildflower Association, you're absolutely correct that that's who partnered with the FDOT to make that happen. We don't have one in our area.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something, you know, it's a gap that Florida Native Plant Society may or may not choose to leap into. I'll be sharing that with the board on Monday, but 2 Mondays in 2 weeks. But it's interesting because we do these things, as you pointed out, with economics and funding. We do these things that are good and laudable, and they get approved by people somewhere up the food chain, and then the chain gets broken somewhere, and we go back to mow it low.
Yeah.
Kelly, I ran into a problem in my city. They had gotten free plants because they were wanting to do the edges of some of the roadways by the water and whatever. And the free plants were bamboo. And they told me this. I talked to my mayor and I said, why would you accept that? Oh, it saves us a ton of money. I said, I have seen the crews go out to cut back the bamboo all the way down weekly now. So in labor costs, you have quadrupled what it would have cost you to put in native plants that would have maintained their edges. And so there's a huge, unlike the city took hundreds of bamboo plants and allowed them to put them in because they were free, and they were so appreciative of these free plants.
And invasive.
Right, and this is like 6 months ago, and I'm having the conversation with the mayor and the so on in my city, going, we could have found a way to write a grant or do something that would have allowed you native plants that were part of the food web and not require weekly cutbacks, because the bamboo is now taken over and it's tall, and we've had accidents at a couple corners because they're so high, the borders.
And
So
they will never get it out. They will never be able to get
No.
that out. It's a grass. They'll never get it out.
So that's why this educational piece is so important, because I'm like, I was on the tree group, the environmental committee for the city, and we always discuss, how did this get, it was broken in the chain, like you're saying. They were told they were getting a whole bunch of free plants, and they took them without looking at what they were.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, sometimes our best intentions can take us in a different direction, but we can always use that as a learning moment. It's always an opportunity, and it's funny that you mentioned bamboo, Louise, because We're trying to come up with a use of, as people cut down their bamboo, bamboo floats. And we're actually thinking about, can we fabricate a type of floating aquatic garden using those, bamboo stalks once they're dried, as natural flotation devices. So, we're it's very.
We've been cutting down the bamboo that's by Rose Bay and making those old-timey fishing poles and giving them out.
Mm-hmm.
Just to find a better use.
That's fantastic. So let me just point out this little photo that I'm sharing right now. So what do you guys see? What's the aesthetic here? Is it beautiful?
No, and it looks like it's got algae.
Ugh, yuck.
Yeah, it's the ugly from my perspective, right? So as I was driving by, I didn't notice this algae bloom. I noticed the pond, and I thought, my first impression was, oh, there's trees and there's shade. But then upon further inspection, there is this green sheen along almost the entire surface. And in this pond, you can barely see it in this picture, but they've even got a bubbler under there, which is to aerate. And when you aerate these ponds, it can actually help them convert some of that nitrogen into nitrogen gas, right? But you can see here that the nutrients are overwhelming this system. And this pond, it's a forward-thinking concept. It's actually gray water from a city utility that they are piping. So unlike the other ponds that we looked at, which are fed mostly by stormwater from the yards and the streets, which a lot of the neighbors, by the way, didn't realize that those storm drains in front of their house fed the stormwater pond behind their house. That was a missing connection. But in this case, we have gray water, reuse water, that is being channeled into this neighborhood pond. And you can see there are some remnants of it being sprayed along the far edges. But if you had more plants, then a lot of those nutrients could be absorbed by the plants. And it certainly could improve. But again, this was an idea. Someone had a concept. Well, let's do something. So instead of putting this stormwater, this gray water and effluent into a river, right? In order to have reuse, you have to have extra capacity, right? When you don't have enough need for the actual waterways, you have to have areas. And so
it just needs more plants. Yeah, more plants. And maybe some ducks, some plants.
Yeah, some plants, and that would be a really good start. So I'm gonna stop sharing that one. And
this is Jay. I am very enjoying your comments, but I must say I probably have to get off pretty soon. I'm still at work, and sorry that I couldn't stay until the last part of this forum, but I am so glad that I get to see everybody. I haven't seen Melissa forever, and Jenny and everybody. So yes. So thank you so much, and I will join whenever I have time of this forum that I know that you do have it next week, or the first week of August, or
yes, we're going to have a pop-up Zoom meeting tomorrow at 2, where we talk to Mike Ulrich, and then next Monday at 2, we're going to talk about emerging techniques in nutrient uptake. And then we're going to talk about LID design manuals and permitting. Wednesday, we're going to have Dr. Wendy Anderson specifically talk about how do we sell green? How do we incentivize this? How do we talk to realtors and other people in the real estate industry to share this information and to educate their clients? And then Thursday, we've got the big picture, green building, green development, green certifications coming in. So thank you, Dr. Cho. We really appreciate your expertise. As always, you are expanding our thought processes, and you always do a great job of tying in history. You're a prolific author, and we really value the investment that you make in our community every single day. So we'll let Dr. Cho jump off at this point, but I wanted to bye, Dr. Cho. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
I wanted to to just take a poll very quickly. So as we mentioned at the beginning, every time we receive a grant for any type of educational outreach, one thing that we do is we try to add value, meaning if there is a grant that we receive, we always try to maximize the return on that grant. And in fact, what we found is that every time we write a grant and we complete it successfully, that helps us build a foundation to get additional grants. And so in this poll, we're simply asking, are you joining us from Volusia County or elsewhere? And so we have got about, more than 90% are coming from Volusia County. So what I'm going to try to do now is another informal poll, a poll within a poll. Can you raise your hand if you live or work in West Volusia? So that would be DeLand, Pearson, De Leon Springs, Orange City, DeBerry. If you could just raise your hand. So down there on in your reactions icon, we're trying to do some metadata analysis here. And very, very good. Thank you all so much. I'm going to now share the results of our little poll. So most people are actually in Volusia County. And so we
are the ones, Kelly, sorry to interrupt, are the ones who are not, are you joining us from Volusia County? Are they Volusia County? Are there any Volusia County residents joining us from some sort of vacation location?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah, sorry, wording.
Really good question. Okay, very good. All right. So what I'd like to do now is just have a little wrap up, and thank you all so much for joining us this evening for this forum. And as I mentioned, tomorrow we have we're going to have another Zoom meeting. It will probably be less than an hour long with Mike Ulrich, Volusia County Utilities Director. We are going to be able to ask him questions about how the county can use COVID funding to fund clean water projects. So thank you all. Please join us if you can for that meeting. I will post that information at on the website at www.riversideconservancy.org. We'll try to also get that on the Green Volusia website. I'm not sure that we'll have time to do that, but what we are doing is posting all of these meetings online. So I'm going to actually stop recording now,